footage that you guys just saw is actually from a brand new camera, and in today's video I'll be talking about that camera and reviewing that camera. And the camera that I am talking about is this bad boy right here. This is the Lumix S5, and in today's video I'm gonna be giving a little review on this camera because I was actually pleasantly surprised at how well this camera performed, and I want to talk all about it in today's video. This camera is a hybrid camera, which means that it's meant to do both things well, and both things I mean photo and video. So I'll be splitting this video into two different kind of sections. I'll do the photography section first and then the video section after, because I'm primarily a photo channel. So obviously I want to talk about the photo specs and the photo realm of this camera first, and then we'll kind of move on to the video stuff, because this is a really good video camera, and I'll talk all about how good it is at video when I get to the video part of the video. So let's begin this review with the photo capabilities of this camera. Now, I'm not the type to get into the very specifics and the science behind the camera and what tech it actually has. So on the screen right now, it's just a quick rundown of its actual specs. But for me, I kind of just care about how well the image quality looks in the end. If the specs help it, cool, I'm all for it, but if it doesn't, then I don't really care for it. And at the end of the day, this camera creates really good photos. So that's all I care about, and that's all I really want to know. So yeah, let's talk about the photos. I've had this camera for about a week now, and I originally was supposed to get a 35mm 1.8 sent to me, but I actually ended up getting an 85 1.8, which at the end of the day, if you're a photographer, you should be able to take good photos with any lens you get, but the 85 is definitely a lens or a focal length that I don't use as much, so I wasn't able to kind of work it into my workflow as well as I would have with a 35. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at my photo examples. They might look a little bit different. It's because I don't really shoot 85 that much. But I'm gonna throw up some examples of photos that I was able to take with this thing, and I'll let you guys kind of judge the photo quality itself. And as you guys can see, the quality of these photos are really, really good. And some of these photos are actually in really low light situations. It's really good in low light, which I noticed, which again, was not really expecting that, but I shot some of these photos at 800 ISO, which is a little bit, on the higher ISO end, and they ended up still being really, really good. I think one of the reasons that it's able to be so good in low light is because it has really good stabilization, which is another thing I noticed with the 85. When shooting with a lens like the 85, you definitely need to have some good stabilization if you're gonna shoot handheld and get some good images. Most of the photos that I took with the 85 in low light, I shot at 125 just because that's what I'm used to shooting at, and there was literally like no shake in the final photos whatsoever because the stabilization on this camera is just that good. You could probably long expose a photo with the 85 handheld and it would still turn out really, really well, which is super nice to know. When it comes to the shutter itself on the Lumix S5, it has a really quiet shutter, which for me isn't too much of a big deal because I don't really shoot events. But if you're an event photographer, you're probably looking for a camera that has a very quiet shutter, and this camera has a really, really quiet shutter. Let me show you guys just how quiet it actually is. You guys hear that? It's really quiet. So it's a really quiet shutter. Other things I like about the actual body itself are that it has a really good form factor. It's really lightweight. It has a bunch of dials and knobs that you can change to different settings, so you can dial it in exactly how you want it to. This camera just has so many buttons and so many dials that once you have it all set up, you probably never have to go in the menu system ever again to fiddle around with anything. And on top of all the buttons, the camera also has really good battery life. It has a swivel screen. It has a really good UI. It's lightweight. It has really good battery life. It has a bright screen. It has a good electronic viewfinder. It's a really nice camera to hold and a really nice camera to use. When it comes to photo, I really think that they did a good job in the photo department. When I was using the Lumix S5 to take photos, there was never really a time where I was like, man, I wish I had this feature, because it already has all the features, which is really good because it covers all the boxes. So at the end of the day, it's a really good photo camera. Now, it isn't a perfect photo camera because it isn't a perfect camera, because I don't think there's a perfect camera in existence. And there are some things that I did notice while shooting with it that I was like, okay, maybe this is something that Lumix could improve on in the future, but they are pretty easy fixes. And the main thing that I noticed was the autofocus. The thing about it is the autofocus was really good when it was working, but I shoot a lot of low light stuff, and obviously in the low light, a lot of autofocus tend to struggle, and the Lumix S5 was no different. It was pretty good in some lighting scenarios, as you guys saw in the photos that I took. However, there were also some scenarios where the focus just would not work whatsoever, so I had to go and manually focus it. And the good thing about the Lumix S5 is that manual focusing on this thing is super easy. It has a little box that pops up, shows you exactly where you're focusing, and you can move the box around to switch to a different area. And it's super fast and super efficient and allows you to manual focus almost as fast as you autofocus. But at the end of the day, I just wish it would have worked better in some scenarios. But when it does work, it works really fast and it finds its target really, really well. But yeah, that's basically everything I have to say about the photo capabilities of this camera. It's a really good photo camera and I definitely enjoyed using it and will continue to use it. The 85, not my lens of choice, but it did perform really well in the scenarios that I put it in. Now that we're done talking about photos, let's go ahead and talk about the video, because this camera is a little beast when it comes to video. And if you guys saw the examples in the beginning of this video, then you've already seen what this camera is capable of doing. So let's go ahead and talk about the Lumix S5's video capability. Right off the bat, this camera is really good at video. It's a really good photo camera, but it's also really good at video. There are some other hybrid cameras on the market that just aren't really tailored to the video side of things. You can definitely tell that the manufacturer put more effort into the photo side of things. This camera definitely took both into consideration equally, because the video on this thing is really, really good. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things I like about the video, and then we'll talk about things that I don't like about the video at the end. So first thing I really like about the video is its in-body stabilization. This obviously helps in photo too, but it helps even more in video, because when you're doing any kind of movement, you need to have a good in-body stabilization. The in-body stabilization of the Lumix S5 is probably the best of any camera I've ever used, and I really enjoyed using it. And because I have the 85 instead of the 35 like I was supposed to, I was kind of worried I wasn't going to be able to use it too much for video, because 85 is like a very, you know, hardcore lens to use specifically for video if you're not using like a dolly or not using like a gimbal or anything. But I handheld all my shots and they turned out pretty well, which is just a testament to how good the in-body stabilization is. Now, obviously they weren't perfect. They weren't like super fluid, because at 85, it's kind of hard to, but the footage that I did take with the 85 turned out really well. And it turned out even better when I used the kit lens, because the kit lens was able to shoot a lot wider. There was some shots that I did at like 20 and 20 to 35. And in those shots, you could like barely tell that it was handheld. It kind of looked more like a gimbal than it did handheld. And that was just like straight out of camera. When I kind of adjusted it in post a little bit, did some warp stabilization, it became even smoother and looked like a straight up dolly shot. So the in-body stabilization is insane in this camera, and it's definitely one of its bigger pros when it comes to video, because once you have really good stabilization, it's kind of hard to go back to a camera that doesn't have that, because the footage is going to look like a day and night difference, which I'm going to keep on using this thing for videos. All I'm going to say for that. Other things the Lumix S5 does really well is it does come with Vlog, so color grading is going to be a lot easier for you. It comes with a bunch of different codecs that you can use, and it records up to 4K 24 or 4K 30 at full frame, which is really good. And it does a bunch of other frame rates and codecs and stuff at 1080p. It basically does all of them. I don't really shoot 1080p, so I don't really know them off the top of my head, but I do know that it does 4K at 24. I mostly shot the video that you guys saw in the beginning at 24 frames per second at 4K. And the reason I didn't shoot like 60 is because unfortunately this camera does crop in to a Super 35 when you are using 60 FPS, but it does have the ability to use that. So just keep that in mind. It can go up to 60 FPS at 4K, but it does have a crop. But not that big of a deal for me, because I shoot at 24 most of the time anyways. But yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. One thing I really liked about the Lumix S5's video capabilities is just the color out of this camera is really, really nice. I barely had to edit any of the colors in post to get them exactly how I wanted to. And they do include a Vlog to Rec 709 conversion LUT on Lumix's website, which is really convenient. So if you want to do that conversion right away, you can just do that. I did grade some without that LUT and it came out just fine, but it's really good colors and it's just really good footage straight out of camera, which I really like and makes me want to shoot more video. Other things that this camera has that are pros when it comes to video stuff is also some of the same things that make it good for photo, and that's obviously all the buttons and dials. If you're into video, you can, program everything to have a specific task. The manual focus and the way it handles manual focus is really good. So if you're using a lens that doesn't have manual focus like most Cine lenses, then you can still pull your focus pretty well in camera. It does have a audio jack, so you can plug in a mic, and it does have two card slots. So that's something I forgot to mention earlier, but it does have two card slots. That's everything I can think of when it comes to pros of video with this camera. Like I said, I've only had it for a week, so I haven't really been able to really dig into this camera and use it for long term. But let's talk about the one thing that I can think of that's like a negative when it comes to video and this camera. And that is that it doesn't have a full HDMI cable output. It has a mini HDMI, which kind of sucks because a full HDMI, you know, it's a lot stronger of a port, and it just makes it so much easier to use because you know, everyone has an HDMI cable. Not everyone has a mini HDMI cable. So you have to get your own mini HDMI cable if you want to use someone else's like external monitor or something. I sometimes use external monitors when I record because I like seeing the image a lot bigger and it's easier to pull focus and stuff like that. And when you're using like a mini HDMI cable, you know, the mini HDMI cable is tiny, and if you pull on it too much, it can break and snap. And I've had mini HDMI cables break in the past a lot faster than normal size HDMI cables. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of like a big negative to me, and probably to most people. So that's one thing to keep in mind. This does not have full HDMI capability. It has mini HDMI to full HDMI. But yeah, that's my review on the Lumix S5. It's a really solid camera, and the very few things that I think are like negatives, they're just like me just like not, you know, really little tiny things. There's nothing that's gonna ruin this camera for me. I think that all of the pros of this camera far outweigh all the negatives of this camera, and at the end of the day, I'm just like surprised no one talks about this camera as much, because like if you like YouTube or Google the Lumix S5, there's not that much talk about it, which is crazy because this is such a good camera, and for its price point too. For its price point, I don't think there's another camera that can do all the things that this camera does. Consider checking out Lumix if you're looking for a hybrid camera, because you might be surprised at how much you like them. That was my review on the Lumix S5. Thank you, Lumix, for sending me this camera. I really like it, and I am definitely keeping you guys on my radar. Make sure to follow me on all my social medias at MoodyDarkRoom. That's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, like everything. And yeah, with that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. All right, see ya.